People love to say technology has made life easier, yet somehow we've reached an era where someone will Uber 3 blocks and still file a complaint because reality didn't match their imagination. And trust me, this nonsense only gets worse from here. 1. A rider once opened his Uber door, took one look at the driver, and immediately complained that the car didn't match his emotional aesthetic for the day, as if rideshare drivers are supposed to align themselves with the customer's horoscope before turning the key. He insisted the driver swap cars, yes, swap cars, as though every Uber driver keeps a spare mood-appropriate vehicle stashed behind a nearby bush for emergencies. When told that reality did not operate on vibes alone, the man spent the entire trip sulking, arms crossed, claiming the vehicle's energy signature was lowering his productivity aura. By the time they reached his destination, a strip mall smoothie shop, he filed a complaint accusing the driver of failing to provide spiritually compatible transportation. The company had to categorize it under miscellaneous because there still isn't a drop-down menu for cosmic disappointment. 2. A woman demanded her taxi driver take a shortcut that avoids all traffic, which sounds reasonable until you realize she meant all traffic as in 0 other vehicles, as if the driver were secretly hiding a private road network available only to the chosen few. She grew increasingly upset each time another car appeared, and as though the driver personally summoned them by failing to maintain the purity of her lane. At one point, she accused him of driving toward traffic on purpose, like he was in cahoots with the Department of Mild Inconvenience. By the end of the ride, she declared the entire city grid poorly curated and filed a complaint requesting a refund because the driver did not achieve the promised car-free path. Naturally, no such promise existed, unless she mistook Google Maps for Moses parting the Red Sea. 3. A man climbed into a rideshare smelling like a fully operational barbecue pit and complained, within 10 seconds, that the driver didn't provide a refreshing enough atmosphere, even though the only atmosphere in danger was the one being slowly smoked by the customer's cologne, which could best be described as mesquite-flavored regret. He spent the entire ride spritzing himself with some kind of artisanal deodorant mist, fogging up the car like it was a botanical garden for insecure lumberjacks. Then, at the end of the trip, he complained that the car smelled weird, filing a report so deeply ironic it practically folded in on itself like a dying star. The evaluation team had to review the footage twice because they assumed the driver was hotboxing a brisket, only to realize the scent offender was sitting in the back seat demanding eucalyptus air like a sweaty woodland spirit. 4. A customer insisted the driver roll down all 4 windows in the middle of winter because the car's vibes felt too enclosed, a statement that became significantly less poetic once the outside temperature introduced itself at a cheerful 14 degrees. The driver, attempting to avoid frostbite, rolled them down halfway, prompting the rider to complain that the airflow wasn't dramatic enough, like they were shooting a shampoo commercial on a highway shoulder. By the time the trip ended, the passenger had wrapped themselves in their scarf like a shivering burrito, but still managed to file a complaint accusing the driver of refusing to create an invigorating wind environment. The company marked the issue as weather preference conflict, which is corporate speak for someone attempted to transform a Corolla into a wind tunnel and got mad when their bones started protesting. 5. A rider requested a taxi to transport him exactly 6 minutes into the future, which turned out to mean he wanted the driver to accelerate fast enough to simulate time dilation, because apparently he slept through every physics lesson but caught the part of Back to the Future where the car goes fast. The driver attempted to clarify he was not, in fact, a temporal technician, but the customer insisted he paid good money for efficiency and therefore deserved a scientifically impossible commute. The man spent the entire ride monitoring the dashboard clock like he expected Einstein to pop out and congratulate him. When the trip ended, precisely at the time dictated by linear reality, he filed a complaint accusing the driver of failing to manipulate time properly. Somewhere, a high school science teacher felt a disturbance in the force and didn't know why. 6. A woman ordered an Uber XL solely because she wanted a vehicle large enough to reflect her accomplishments, which already set the tone for what came next. Upon arrival, she stared at the minivan like it had personally insulted her resume, declaring it not commanding enough for a woman of her standing. She then asked the driver if he could inflate the brand perception by parking more confidently, whatever that means outside of a motivational seminar. Throughout the ride, she lectured the driver about presentational excellence, while simultaneously spilling granola across the seat like a squirrel having an emotional episode. After reaching her destination, she left a one-star review claiming the car lacked the prestige necessary to support her professional narrative. If cars could roll their eyes, that minivan would have permanently misaligned its suspension. 7. A man complained that his taxi driver didn't read his mind fast enough because he entered the vehicle in complete silence, provided no address, no neighborhood, not even a general direction, and then became furious when the driver dared to ask where he wanted to go. He insisted a professional driver should already know, as though he expected the cab to be equipped with telepathic GPS or perhaps a psychic intern in the glove compartment. When the driver politely requested information again, the customer sighed dramatically and muttered, "Ugh, do I have to do everything myself?" By the end of the ride, which only succeeded after 3 clarifications and 1 unexpected detour caused entirely by the passenger's refusal to articulate words, he filed a complaint stating the driver lacked intuition. Meanwhile, intuition had packed its bags and left the city out of sheer exhaustion. 8. A rider demanded the Uber driver match the playlist of his childhood, which would have been slightly less bizarre if he had supplied even a vague genre. Instead, he insisted the driver should figure it out, as though the man spent his workdays studying customers' psychological backstories. When the driver selected a random pop playlist, the rider declared it emotionally inaccurate and requested something with fewer vowels. The driver switched to instrumental tracks, prompting the rider to claim it lacked narrative depth. Eventually, the rider put in earbuds, which solved exactly nothing because he still filed a complaint that the driver failed to facilitate personal nostalgia. If Uber ever adds psychic DJing as an add-on feature, it'll exist solely because of this man and his aggressively theatrical approach to sentimental memory. 9. A woman demanded her driver avoid every red light, not metaphorically, but literally, as if the driver had the ability to negotiate traffic signals spiritually or perhaps bribe them with spare change. Every time they approached a yellow light, she clapped her hands like she was coaching a toddler to walk faster. When a red light became unavoidable, as red lights famously do, she groaned theatrically and accused the driver of not committing to the momentum. Upon arrival, she left a scathing note saying the driver intentionally halted progress, which sounds less like a traffic comment and more like feedback for a failing employee at a performance review. Somewhere in the city, the stoplights continued doing their jobs with machine-like indifference to her personal storyline. 10. A man entered a rideshare carrying a tropical smoothie the size of an emotional support animal and immediately complained that the driver didn't provide a cup holder worthy of his beverage, which he referred to as a fragile masterpiece of flavor. The driver offered napkins, which the man treated like an insult to smoothie culture. When the drink inevitably toppled over during a turn, because balancing a cup on your own knee is not a recognized engineering discipline, the man blamed the driver for creating an unstable hydration environment. He then demanded reimbursement for what he called a catastrophic fruit event. The complaint arrived at headquarters labeled as operator negligence, but after reading the details, the support agent quietly reclassified it under gravity. 11. A customer became outraged when the driver refused to let her vape inside the car because she believed personal misting should be considered a fundamental human right. She argued that her vape cloud smelled like vanilla dreams and therefore counted as an air freshener. The driver reminded her that blowing hot dessert-scented steam into a stranger's car is not a legally recognized decor option. She then pivoted to claiming that stopping her was an infringement on artistic expression, as though she was performing avant-garde theater with nicotine. When the driver declined again, she dramatically unrolled the window like a medieval queen exiling her frustrations into the night. Upon arrival, she filed a complaint insisting the driver suppressed her freedom to create ambiance. The only ambiance created was the lingering scent of burnt cupcake and frustration. 12. A man insisted the driver stop halfway through the trip so he could test the car's aura in different lighting, which turned out to mean he wanted to see if the car felt more aligned with his spiritual blueprint under street lamps versus storefronts. He exited repeatedly, circling the vehicle like a mystic at a used car dealership, muttering about chromatic resonance. When the driver cautioned him about blocking traffic, the man frowned as if practicality were an unfortunate disease. After the sixth lighting test yielded no enlightenment, he climbed back in and complained that the car lacked an adaptable soul. He later filed a formal complaint declaring the experience a failure of vehicular self-expression, which is impressive considering the car was a perfectly normal Toyota whose only spiritual blueprint involved regular oil changes. 13. A passenger demanded silence so he could meditate on the economic symbolism of the journey, which became significantly less lofty once he realized the driver's turn signal makes a clicking sound, something he treated as an intentional act of sonic warfare. He glared every time the driver changed lanes, as though flicking the indicator counted as aggression. When the driver apologized, the man whispered, "It's fine, I'll just recenter myself," with the tone of someone forgiving a mortal sin. After 20 minutes of this contemplative melodrama, he announced the ride had interrupted his spiritual trajectory, and later filed a complaint accusing the driver of creating a hostile mindfulness environment. If enlightenment were graded like group projects, this man would still be repeating the class. 14. A rider insisted the taxi driver take a route that follows the ley lines, which would have been less concerning if he didn't produce a hand-drawn map that looked like ancient pirate cartography interpreted by a bored toddler. He claimed the energy grid of the city demanded they avoid right turns because right angles block cosmic flow. The driver gamely attempted a left turn-only strategy until physics, road design, and common sense teamed up to make the plan impossible. The passenger became frustrated, muttering about ignorance of the ancient ways while sitting in the back seat wearing Bluetooth headphones. After the trip, he complained that the driver sabotaged metaphysical efficiency. The support team debated creating a new category called geomancy disputes, before ultimately labeling it route preference, which might be the funniest understatement in corporate history. 15. A customer got angry because the driver didn't greet him with sufficient enthusiasm, claiming that a quick nod and a polite hello made him feel emotionally undersupported. He then explained that a proper welcome should include verbal warmth, upward energy, and maybe a light sense of celebration, which sounded less like a ride-share request and more like the opening ceremony of the Olympics. The driver's attempts to be cheerier only irritated the passenger further, leading him to say the tone now felt forced, as if drivers are expected to balance their emotional performance at Broadway levels. After reaching his destination, a pharmacy, the rider filed a review claiming the driver created an emotionally neutral environment, a phrase that could double as a description for gravity, concrete, or any other absolutely normal facet of existence. It turns out some people want chauffeurs, therapists, and hype squads, all for the cost of a short ride to buy vitamins. 16. A rider once demanded the Uber driver stop speaking entirely, not just to him, but in general, because he believed human conversation disrupts the internal balance of a moving vehicle, a claim he delivered with the authority of someone who just invented a science in the previous 5 seconds. He insisted the driver avoid humming, sighing, exhaling too noticeably, or disturbing the air with vocal residue, which is a remarkable way to describe breathing. When the driver cleared his throat once, the passenger reacted like someone had fired a starter pistol inside the cabin. He spent the ride glaring at the rearview mirror, clutching his tote bag like a noise-sensitive Victorian nobleman. When they arrived, he filed a complaint stating the driver used unnecessary air modulation, a phrase that could mean anything from whispering to existing. Somewhere in the world, sound waves felt personally attacked by this man's lifestyle. 17. A customer insisted that the taxi driver turn the car around because he spotted a billboard that gave him bad energy, which would have been merely eccentric if he hadn't declared the ad to be an omen of rerouting. He treated the billboard, a cheerful insurance advertisement featuring a smiling cartoon umbrella, as though it were a cursed artifact from an archaeological dig. He demanded the driver take an alternate road free of symbolic interference, which became increasingly difficult as the city continued committing the outrageous crime of having advertisements on every available surface. When they passed a second umbrella-themed ad, he gasped dramatically and accused the universe of disrespecting him personally. He later filed a complaint claiming the driver failed to honor the metaphysical detour, which raises the question of what exactly he expected a professional driver to do: negotiate with the spirit world or simply ban umbrellas from public imagery. 18. A passenger boarded an Uber and immediately asked the driver to keep his eyes on the road at all times, which sounds perfectly reasonable, until he clarified that he meant literally all times, including red lights, parked moments, and the instant when the car first began moving, as though eyelids were an optional accessory drivers choose for fun. Anytime the driver blinked, the passenger made a noise of panicked disapproval, as though each blink were a reckless flirtation with disaster. At one stop sign, the rider leaned forward and whispered, "I saw that," after the driver took a normal human blink lasting maybe a quarter of a second. By the end of the ride, the passenger filed a complaint accusing the driver of compromising visual continuity, a phrase that makes blinking sound like a federal offense. If this man ever discovers that the human eye cannot rotate 360 degrees, he will undoubtedly consider it a design flaw. 19. A rider demanded the driver accelerate more slowly because he had a delicate inner ear ecosystem, which he described with the seriousness of a researcher guarding endangered wildlife. He claimed that even mild acceleration caused turbulence in his personal equilibrium field, which is a poetic way of admitting cars make him queasy. The driver attempted to comply, easing forward with the gentleness of a whisper, prompting the passenger to still declare the movement violently abrupt. Eventually, the car crawled at a pace typically reserved for toddlers pushing toy strollers, yet the passenger clutched the door like he was surviving an emergency landing. Upon arrival, he filed a complaint alleging the driver failed to respect the fragility of the biome, which sounds less like a rideshare experience and more like a nature documentary gone wrong. Somewhere, actual ecosystems rolled their eyes at the competition. 20. A rider became furious that the Uber had a faint dashboard reflection on the windshield, claiming it interfered with the cinematic quality of the night, as if the driver were responsible for customizing the optics of reality. He insisted the driver adjust every possible setting, brightness, seat height, cosmic alignment, to eliminate the reflection entirely, even though reflections are famously loyal to the laws of physics rather than customer preferences. When the driver gently explained this, the passenger sighed with theatrical disappointment, muttering about how attention to detail is a lost art. He then stared out the window dramatically, as though auditioning for a movie that did not exist. When the trip ended, he filed a complaint stating the driver failed to provide a visually immersive environment, which would make sense only if Uber added an IMAX upgrade tier. Until then, windshield reflections will continue their reign as unavoidable optical villains. 21. A customer once demanded the driver maintain an exact interior temperature of 73.5 degrees, without ever using digits, of course, because he believed his body operated on a narrow thermal bandwidth. He held his hand near the vent like a royal tester evaluating the warmth of a banquet feast, offering feedback every 30 seconds despite the fact that climate control systems are not mood rings. Anytime the temperature shifted slightly, as temperatures do when a door opens, air moves, or the planet continues rotating, he accused the driver of tampering with the equilibrium of the journey. By the end of the ride, he had wrapped himself in a scarf while still insisting he was on the brink of thermal instability, filing a complaint that essentially boiled down to reality refused to cooperate with his thermostat fantasies. Somewhere, the concept of weather laughed quietly and kept doing its job. 22. A rider entered the vehicle and immediately asked for a route, with more inspirational scenery, as though the driver were secretly hiding a portal to a hidden valley filled with motivational waterfalls and self-esteem-enhancing deer. When the driver explained that the city offered a limited selection of scenic vistas, the passenger insisted on detouring through neighborhoods he had once seen in a travel blog. Each time they passed something mundane, a laundromat, a dumpster, a brick wall, the rider sighed loudly and said the driver should have anticipated this aesthetic downgrade. By the time they reached the destination, the passenger had convinced himself that his disappointment was due to poor route curation rather than the simple fact that he lived in a perfectly average town. His complaint claimed the driver failed to deliver a visually enriching experience, a phrase normally reserved for museums, not Tuesday afternoon commutes past grocery stores. 23. A woman berated her taxi driver for not offering seasonal small talk, insisting that proper conversational etiquette required him to mention the weather, upcoming holidays, or the general vibe of the month. When the driver responded politely but without enthusiasm, she tutted like a disappointed aunt at a family gathering. Halfway through the ride, she began suggesting topics he should bring up, including light community gossip and gentle observations about the human condition, apparently forgetting she was speaking to someone who was also navigating urban traffic. She later filed a complaint saying the driver failed to honor conversational traditions, as though there exists a secret handbook listing exactly what strangers must discuss in a moving vehicle. If holiday chatter ever becomes mandatory, this woman will undoubtedly be crowned its grand enforcer. 24. A rider became convinced that the Uber's interior lights were judging him, not metaphorically but literally, as though LEDs have opinions and express them through wattage. He demanded the driver turn the lights off because their glow felt accusatory, yet complained moments later that the darkness felt sneaky, leaving no illumination level capable of satisfying his psychological labyrinth. He spent the ride alternating between paranoia and indignation, glaring at the ceiling like it had insulted his ancestors. When the trip ended, his complaint stated the driver failed to control the emotional tone of the cabin lighting, a sentence that should be framed in the Museum of Human Overreaction. If interior lights ever become sentient, they will file their own complaint about this man. 25. A passenger insisted that the taxi avoid all streets containing potholes, a demand equivalent to asking the ocean to stop being wet. He treated each minor bump as a personal betrayal, gasping loudly as though the car had plummeted into a geological chasm rather than encountering a routine imperfection. He accused the driver of choosing rough roads out of spite, ignoring the reality that city maintenance schedules do not operate on the emotional needs of one man with fragile expectations. Eventually, he asked the driver to drive exclusively on freshly paved surfaces, a request achievable only if the city repaved its roads moments before he appeared. His complaint declared the trip structurally hostile, which is a dramatic way of saying the world did not flatten itself to accommodate him. 26. A rider insisted the driver avoid using the brakes entirely because he preferred a fluid, unbroken momentum arc, which he described like he was directing a ballet rather than commuting to a bar. The driver attempted to coast gently, but unsurprisingly, other cars existed and occasionally stopped, an inconvenience the passenger took as proof of the universe's poor planning. Each time the car slowed even slightly, he groaned like someone interrupting a spiritual ritual. By the end, he lectured the driver about ruining the journey's energetic flow, before submitting a complaint claiming the ride lacked kinetic harmony. One wonders what this man does when encountering a literal staircase, sue gravity, or request a momentum refund. 27. A customer demanded the driver narrate the ride like a guided tour, even though the journey involved nothing more exotic than strip malls, chain pharmacies, and an aggressively beige apartment complex. When the driver hesitated, the passenger began asking questions such as, "What's the historical significance of that deli?" And "Does this intersection have cultural meaning?" as though the driver kept a degree in municipal anthropology in the glove compartment. When the driver admitted he didn't know the origin story of the local discount mattress store, the passenger scoffed and said, "You clearly didn't prepare." His complaint afterward accused the driver of failing to contextualize the surroundings, which is an elegant way of admitting he wanted a documentary but paid for a car ride. 28. A rider became upset that the driver didn't laugh at his jokes, even though the jokes in question could have been used as a non-lethal crowd control device. He delivered puns so structurally weak they could collapse under their own disappointment, pausing expectantly after each one like a comedian waiting for applause that would never come. The driver offered polite smiles, which the passenger took as hostile neutrality. By the end of the trip, the man was sulking and announced he was giving a low rating because the driver didn't support the comedic environment. The complaint listed the driver's crime as failure to engage with humorous content, which suggests that someday rideshare apps may include a mandatory laugh track for customers who bruise easily. 29. A passenger demanded the ride be conducted at ceremonial speed, a term he refused to define but insisted the driver should just know intuitively, as though Uber selects drivers based on their ability to interpret vague spiritual riddles. Anytime the car went faster than a gentle glide, he claimed the journey was being rushed. Anytime it slowed, he accused the driver of stalling the ritual. He spoke in cryptic phrases about the rhythm of arrivals and the sacred tempo of travel, none of which clarified whether he wanted turtle speed, normal speed, or perhaps a religious procession. After arriving, he filed a complaint alleging the driver failed to honor the metaphysical pacing, a charge only meaningful in communities where time is measured using incense and moonlight. For the rest of humanity, it simply means the customer had no idea what he wanted, and he wanted it very loudly. And that's the grand tour of human transportation disasters. Pick the dumbest one in the comments, because apparently this rabbit hole goes much deeper. Like, subscribe and buckle up for next time.